The title is based on Homer's The Odyssey. On their way home from the Trojan War, Odysseus and his crew are blown onto the shore of the island of the Lotus Eaters. There, the crew partake of the lotus flower that everyone eats and become so intoxicated that they forget about ever returning home. Arriving in Taipei with only $100, the author sets out on a last hurrah to find both a great kung fu master and enlightenment, but soon becomes one of the modern lotus eaters, expats from all over the world that have become so intoxicated by the exotic lifestyle of Taipei's underground that they forget about ever returning home. What begins as a quest for meaning descends into hedonism and ends in a classic Greek tragedy of madness, murder, and suicide. They were all there waiting on the mountain, the ghosts of days gone past, celebrating my imminent arrival. Twisting back and forth up the mountain, I walked the now familiar trail. I was rounding the crest that provided a view of the city below, whose twinkling lights shone invitingly through the sunset. El Dorado. Now, like a god looking down on the melodrama and madness of human existence. In the distance, the sounds of music and laughter told me I was close to the great hall. I must be dead. I wasn't going back. Going home would mean a certain death. Not the physical death of the body, but the death of the spirit. What awaited me there was a career, a wife and kids, a house in the suburbs. Might as well shoot me now. Dale, my kung fu brother, and I were spending our last night in one of the travelers' hostels in Chungking Mansions on the Kowloon side of Hong Kong. We had come to the end of our journey, Dale and I. We had a hell of a trip. Studied under the greatest kung fu masters in Hong Kong, and were among the first Westerners to go up the Pearl River to Canton since the Communist Chinese opened its doors to tourism. We had dropped magic mushrooms and fucked our brains out on the beaches of Koh Samui, and smoked opium and danced in the moonlight with a Karan shaman in the remote jungles of the Golden Triangle. But now we were out of money and out of time, with only the one-year open return airline tickets nearing their expiration date. Dale had responsibilities, and I had a job waiting that I had long since become bored with. There seemed no way out. Go back, grow old, and die. Might as well shoot me now. As with all hostels, this one had a bulletin board in the communal kitchen. Dozens of handwritten notes on torn notepad paper or the backs of menus were tacked to the corkboard, some written in pencil, some in ballpoint pen, others with a large red magic marker. James, we have moved on to Jakarta. We'll be at the Saipan Hotel. Love, Kenny and Margaret. Laurie and Steve, sorry we missed you. Catch up with you in Tokyo. Kelly and the rest of the girls. Looking for a ticket back to L.A. Open return of transferable OK. Room 10. There was one notice that caught my attention. A printed flyer on yellow paper that read, traveling to Taiwan? Earn a free return airline ticket and $100 US if you only have carry-on luggage. Inquire at front desk. I had met an American girl in a bar a week earlier. Julie lived in Taiwan and told me that it was easy to find work there. She said that if I was interested in going there, I could have her room at the apartment she shared with two other Americans, since she was soon returning to the States. She had written down her phone number, where she was staying in Hong Kong. I didn't expect at the time that I would ever take her up on the offer. I was reasonably well read on Asian cultures, but Taiwan was something of an orphan in the pantheon of Eastern nirvanas. I had a vague idea that it was some third world sweatshop. I wasn't even sure what language they spoke. I called her and asked if the offer of a room was still open, and she said it was. Julie was delighted that I decided to travel there and knew I would really enjoy it. She told me she would call her roommates in Taipei and tell them that I would be arriving there within the next few days. I then went to the front desk to see about the free airline ticket and the $100. Nothing could be worse than going back, and there would never be a better opportunity to escape, at least for a little while longer. What did I have to lose? In the daylight, Taipei isn't pretty. There is a perpetual haze in the air that eventually stains every building the same yellow-gray color. Old Taipei was built along the Danshui River Valley, but the city had long since filled the lowlands, and now the flood of chaos and concrete had risen up the sides of the surrounding mountains that trapped the city in a gigantic bowl. While constraining the bulging mass of humanity, the mountains also trapped the exhaust fumes, humidity, and the sulfur dioxide that steamed yellow from the dormant volcano of Yamingshan, Grass Mountain. To this cocktail of gases is added the output from nearly 3 million oil and leaded gas-burning two-stroke motorcycles. The resulting atmosphere is so corrosive that electronics components begin acting erratically after a few weeks of exposure. Televisions will suddenly change channels. Clock alarms would go off at the wrong hours. Computers crash. Standing for an hour in the open will cause any white clothing to turn gray. Wipe the sweat from your forehead after walking down the block, and your tissue looks like it was used to check the oil in your car. While the mountains prevented the winds from blowing away the fumes, they also caused the rains to fall, warm and strangely sweet, sometimes without a hint of cloud. It was the rain, coming almost every night, which washed the city clean enough for another day's use. I arrived at Chiang Kai-shek Airport around 2 in the afternoon and took the airport bus to Taipei. The bus stopped near the Hilton in front of the brand new McDonald's, across from the old train station. I had grown accustomed to the innocuous sight of a Western fast food franchise nestled in an alien landscape, but I still hated it. I shared a taxi with another smuggler I was introduced to at the airport in Hong Kong, another backpacker. We went to the address that was printed on the business card I couldn't read. It turned out to be a student hostel, nothing more than an apartment converted into something of a hostel with a desk at the front door. 3 bedrooms served as dorms with 3 bunk beds stuffed into each. There were about a half-dozen Western and European college students milling about drinking coffee or cooking food in the communal kitchen, all of which was visible from the front door. A middle-aged Chinese woman wearing a stained smock unceremoniously checked off the goods we had brought from Hong Kong, her hair in curlers and a cigarette dangling from her mouth. 2 Nike cameras, 6 Yves Saint Laurent knockoffs, 2 kilos of white ginseng, 50 pounds of dried mushrooms from Manchuria. We each received 100 cash US. There were still several hours of daylight, so I decided to walk back to get a better feel for the city. I returned to the Hilton around sunset and phoned the number Julie had given me. A man who identified himself as Robert answered the phone, and I introduced myself. He had never heard of me before. Julie hadn't called them yet, and I was put in the awkward position of explaining that a complete stranger is waiting to move into their home. Robert tried to give me directions, but since all the street and place names were in Chinese, I couldn't remember any of it. I flagged down one of the trimly dressed Hilton hostesses, and Robert gave her the information, which she wrote down in Chinese for me to show the bus driver. Robert's instructions were to take the 69 bus right out in front of the Hilton lobby to a place called Nehu. When you see a lake, get ready to get off, were his final directions. It was dark by the time the bus reached the suburbs. I tried to orientate myself during the drive, but the streets had become a blur of incomprehensible neon. It had taken nearly 40 minutes, and I was beginning to think that I had overshot the stop. I had shown the bus driver the note written by the hostess, but now I wasn't sure that the grunt he gave in response was an affirmation or not. There were only 2 other people left on board, and I began to get up when the bus stopped. The driver yelled out something I couldn't understand. Since the 2 other passengers now turned to look at me, I surmised that this must be my stop. I found myself on a dimly lit, deserted street without the slightest clue as to where to go. There were several streets or alleys intersecting the road we had come along. Everywhere there were buildings that I believed were residential, but you can never be sure in Asia. One of the passengers, a university student, had gotten off at the same stop. He approached me in an openly friendly manner and began to speak in what a few minutes later I recognized as English. I began the pantomime of being lost and showed him the paper. He read it and began to nod and pointed down a dark alley. That would have been my last choice. He must have sensed my hesitation because he bounded across the road and down the alley waving for me to follow. We arrived a short 2 blocks later in front of a 5-story residential building that, although not tall by local standards, stretched almost a half a block in either direction. The ground floor was sealed off by rolling stainless steel shutters as though the residents expected an air raid. The university student stood in front of another steel door that was the entrance to the building, although one could have easily walked by it without noticing. There was a small steel panel off one side and 2 rows of buttons. Next to the buttons were Chinese characters, no numbers. "Which button?" I pantomimed the student. I shrugged. He pushed one, and a short time later a Chinese woman answered. They exchanged information. The student turned to me with a look of embarrassment. I shrugged. He pushed another button, and soon came a man's voice. "Wei?" This I recognized as the standard greeting when answering the phone in China. They spoke in Chinese, and I could tell from the rising tone of excitement that this was the correct address. A loud metallic buzzing noise was followed by the steel door opening. No one was inside the dark stairwell behind the door. The university student led the way up the stairs. The apartment was on the 3rd floor and was guarded by double doors, one of bars and steel mesh, the second of laminated steel. The doors were already open and led onto a balcony that overlooked the neighboring Peking Opera School. I paused on the balcony to scan for landmarks, to try and orient myself. The sliding glass door was also open, and during my pause, the university student thought perhaps he should lead, and so he entered first. I heard greetings being exchanged in Mandarin. Robert Bogosian was alone when we arrived. We made our introductions, and he explained that Mark, the other roommate, should be back soon. Bogo exchanged some dialogue with the university student, and they both wrote out each other's phone numbers. There was an uncomfortable pause. Both Robert and I wanted to get rid of my guide, but the student stood there so in awe of the sight of 2 Americans in this far corner of Taipei that he didn't move. He kept smiling and bobbing his head as though agreeing, although no one had spoken. Bogo finally made apologies and told him we had an urgent appointment first thing in the morning, and we had to go to sleep now. With much awkwardness and ceremony, the university student bowed out of the apartment. The interior of the apartment consisted of plain, painted concrete walls on a cool marble tile floor. On the ceiling, there was a box containing 4 large fluorescent lights. The low-level indirect lighting preferences of the West had not yet become fashionable, and the style in Taipei was to light up every room like the floor of a factory. Some tatamis were placed against the wall on one side of the living room. A low coffee table separated the tatamis from 2 rattan chairs. Robert returned with some Chinese green tea. We sat in the 2 chairs and looked at each other across the table. Conversation when meeting travelers on the road follows the same sequence: name, place of origin, time of arrival, purpose, future destination, previous destinations. Sensing that both of us had gone through this sequence too many times now to be interesting, I answered the above in short manner. Bogo did likewise. Michigan, almost a year, studying Mandarin. Hong Kong, Hong Kong. Tell me, does anybody ever call you Bogo? I asked. Yeah, that has been my nickname since grade school. How did you know? I used to live with another guy whose name was also Bogosian, and we all called him Bogo too. I sensed the bonding process starting. So you're Armenian? Yeah, you know about Armenians? Traditionally, they were great warriors from the Caucasus region, I said, playing my citizen of the world character. Bogo relaxed a little bit more. But you don't look Armenian, I said, which was true. Bogo's complexion was fair, and his hair was light brown. He stood a fit 5'8" with strong dimpled jaws and intelligent green eyes I knew women found attractive. Well, actually only my father is Armenian. My mother is Irish. Score another point. So how did you come to meet Julie? Bogo asked, referring to the one person we knew in common. I related the relevant details of New Year's Eve 1986. Bogo looked a bit put off that Julie would just send some stranger she met at a nightclub in Hong Kong with instructions to move right on in. He assured me he was more upset with her than me, and he was wondering, by the way, if I'd fucked Julie. Why, are you jealous? I teased. I knew from Julie that there was never anything between her and her Three's Company roommates. Julie was not ugly, but she wasn't the kind of girl young men fantasize about either. No, I was just wondering if you're some fucking gigolo or something. I knew then I would like Bogo. You mean, like, I fucked her into giving me this luxurious apartment? I raised my arms and looked about the minimal interior. Bogo laughed. Yeah, I guess a stud like you could do better than this. Thanks for noticing. And by the way, you're pretty cute yourself. Bogo brought one hand to his mouth, and with the other he waved me away in the manner of an aging drag queen. We had already reached what I call the dog's fucking stage of male bonding. Mark, the other roommate, arrived, and Bogo quickly filled in the details. After Mark had settled in, I made my next move. Since we're all together, I don't suppose you guys would mind having a little drink on me. What have you got? Some duty-free booze? Mark said eagerly. Only the best, I said as I pulled out a bottle of Jack Daniels. Appreciative murmurs were heard, and Bogo went to get the glasses. During the course of the evening, we drank that bottle and another less expensive bottle of whiskey I had also brought along. Mark was from California. He was tall and big, and you could see his genetics tended him towards the heavy side, but he hadn't yet succumbed to its influence. He was green-eyed with reddish-brown hair and sported a neatly trimmed beard. We spent the night drinking and recounting our adventures in Asia, even to the point of playfully teasing and insulting each other. It was male bonding at its best. The next day, under more sober conditions, Mark and Bogo said that they preferred living just the two of them, Even though they had a spare room, they felt they needed the extra space. However, I could stay until they had fixed me up with work and an apartment of my own. This was somewhat unexpected, since I was sure I had convinced them both into thinking I was a decent sort of fellow. I wasn't put off. For the next couple of days, I did the cleaning and cooking and pretended that it was my nature to do so. By the time they found out I was faking, we were already roommates, good friends, and set on the road to moral ruin. A new name. In ancient tradition, a warrior's name must be given. A warrior cannot choose a name for himself. It is fate that chooses a name. It must be given spontaneously and naturally, and everyone who hears the name must feel that it is suited to the warrior's personality. If fate does not provide a name spontaneously, then a warrior can seek out a name giver who is guided by his heightened intuition to choose a name. The Chinese also have a tradition of using different names. Name changes correspond to changes in lifestyle. There are diminutive names used during childhood, such as Little Piggy or Silly Egg. This is so the gods do not become jealous of a high-sounding name and cause misfortune. When the children enter grade school, they may be given another name. When they start a new business or change occupation, they may again change their name to reflect their new life. During my life in Taiwan, no one called me by my birth name. I was surprised at the practicality of using different names. This was a unique form of freedom. The Western tradition of using a single name from birth now seems suffocating and constraining. A single name became full with the years of emotional connotations, but a new name allows you to leave that other person behind. Sure, all that shit happened, but it happened to him, that other guy who lived then, and that was only a memory. You're not sure it was real or a dream. In the West, we are obsessed with who we are and why we are not happy being that person. The single name contributes to this fixation on a single identity, when in fact, we are many people. To live as a single, neatly defined unit, categorized by a single label, is contrary to what we are, actors on a stage. The Chinese tradition of changing names is one of the few escape valves from the pressure of that society's oppressive conformity. A few days after bonding with the boys, an old friend of Julie's dropped by for a visit. Susan was a fair-haired New York City girl who lived alone in a nearby suburb. We all sat on the tatamis, drinking Johnny Walker in little Chinese teacups. Mark felt honor-bound to provide the booze, since we had drunk all 3 bottles I had bought duty-free. He had gone to the government-run imported liquor store downtown to buy the good stuff. The extra import duty made this a costly taste preference. As someone who could care less about the taste of booze, I always drink the cheap stuff. The point is to get drunk like real men, not act all frou-frou about how you enjoy the bouquet. I asked what the locals drank, and shudders were seen around the room. "Why? What's wrong with the local brew?" I asked. "Well, first it gives you a headache, and then you go blind," answered Mark as he downed his cup of Johnny Walker and smacked his lips in delight. Bogo had gone to the kitchen to get some beer chasers, and Mark asked him to bring out all the Chinese liquor they had. Bogo came back with several different bottles, all about 3/4 full. They had been sampled and deemed undrinkable. Bogo set the bottles on the table and brought extra glasses. "Help yourself," he said. I poured a shot glass full from a bottle labeled Shaoxing wine and offered it around the table. Susan accepted the glass, as did Bogo, but Mark turned his nose up and sneered. It tasted horrible, like whiskey mixed with equal parts soy sauce. The next bottle was labeled Taiwan Government Whiskey, and everyone accepted a shot. It went down like swallowing sandpaper. The third bottle was small and contained a clear liquid that had an odd green tint. The label featured a drawing of sorghum and the name Gaoliang. I poured a glass, and as I offered the glass round the table, everyone recoiled in horror. I took a whiff and checked the label again to make sure it wasn't paint remover. In small print it read, 80% grain alcohol, 160 proof. I offered a toast and downed the revolting brew in one gulp. It burned in my stomach and sent a wave of heat outwards through my body. I shuddered uncontrollably for a few seconds, and I briefly wondered if it would escalate into convulsions. "Not bad," I said, and poured another. "You're not really going to drink any more of that, are you?" asked Susan, with fear and curiosity. "Me, warrior," I replied, while beating my chest with a closed fist. "No fear, drink yellow man fire water." "God, he really is Jack the Smack," said Susan to the others as though I wasn't there. "What's that mean?" I asked, although I knew exactly what it meant. Someone was referring to me by that moniker. I was there only a few days, and already there had been talk. "Well, actually, Mark and I wanted to talk to you about that," said Bogo. The mood turned ominous. "We're really worried about you being here," Bogo continued. Did I do something wrong? My mind raced through recent memories, searching for something I might have said. Maybe the Armenian sheep-fucking jokes I told, or my insinuation that Mark's penis was undersized. "No, it's not you, it's the heroin. We're nervous about the heroin being in our apartment since the police could walk in at any time." "What heroin?" I asked. "The heroin you told us you smuggled in from Hong Kong," Bogo replied. I was relieved. I knew instantly where the miscommunication was. I had told the story that when the smuggling syndicate was packing my bag, I became suspicious that 2 brick-sized packages wrapped in brown paper might be heroin. I had asked them to open the packages so I could check the contents, which they did without hesitation. I immediately recognized the contents to be dried ginseng roots. Somehow, the alcohol had erased the memory of the ginseng part of the story, and they both awoke the next day believing that I had 2 kilos of heroin. It was all a misunderstanding, which I explained. "See, I told you we had it wrong," said Mark. "If he really had that much dope, you'd think he'd be staying here? He'd be staying at the Lili Sheridan ordering $1,000 hookers." "So were you guys calling me Jack the Smack behind my back all this time?" I asked. "It was Bogo's idea," said Mark. "The next morning, we couldn't remember your name, and so Bogo called you Jack the Smack." "Well, it suits him all right," said Susan. "Yeah, I like it better than, what's your name again?" said Mark. "No, it should be The Smack," said Bogo. "No, just Smack, period," returned Mark. "Yeah, just Smack," agreed Bogo. Thus, according to ancient tradition, a warrior receives his nickname. It must be spontaneous, and it must suit the bearer's personality. From then on, everyone called me Smack.